"You don't belong here," Charlotte Whitmore said, her voice slicing clean through the low hum of $1 million charity gala as heads turned in slow, deliberate waves, crystal chandeliers reflecting off polished marble floors, while every conversation within a 50-foot radius quietly died. And in the center of it all stood Darius Cole, still, composed, dressed in a simple black suit that carried no designer logo, no statement of wealth, nothing that fit the room's unspoken dress code of excess. And yet somehow everything about him held its own gravity, the kind that didn't ask for attention but commanded it anyway. Charlotte tilted her head slightly, her diamond earrings catching the light as she let out a small, dismissive laugh, the kind practiced over years of never being questioned, never being challenged, and in one careless motion meant to humiliate. She crossed a line no one else in the room dared to even approach. A collective inhale rippled through the crowd, subtle but undeniable, a shift in atmosphere like the pressure drop before a storm. And still Darius didn't react, didn't raise a hand, didn't wipe his face, didn't give her the satisfaction of acknowledgement. Instead, he stood there as if the moment had already passed for him, as if it had happened before in different rooms, with different faces, wearing the same expression of quiet entitlement. A man near the bar whispered something about security. Another guest murmured that he must have slipped in, that he didn't look like a donor, didn't look like legacy, didn't look like the kind of name printed on the gold-embossed invitation cards being checked at the door just minutes earlier. Charlotte folded her arms, emboldened by the silence of the crowd, mistaking it for agreement, for support, for validation of her judgment. Someone should check his invite, she added, louder now, turning the room itself into a witness against him. And like clockwork, two security staff began moving closer, their posture cautious but firm, eyes scanning Darius like he was a problem waiting to be removed. Across the room, a young coordinator named Ethan Brooks hesitated, his tablet still in hand, his eyes narrowing, slightly as if trying to place something, a name, a detail, something that didn't quite match the narrative unfolding in front of him. But before he could speak, the momentum had already shifted too far. Darius finally moved, not to defend himself, not to argue, but simply to adjust his cuff as if resetting the moment on his own terms. His gaze lifted, calm, steady, not toward Charlotte, but beyond her, as if she had already become irrelevant. And in that quiet, almost invisible motion, something changed, not in the room, not yet, but in the direction of what was about to come, because this wasn't the beginning of a confrontation, it was the beginning of a test, and no one in that ballroom realized they had already failed it. The silence did not break. It stretched, tightening across the ballroom like invisible wire as the two security staff slowed their approach, uncertain now, reading the room, reading the man, because Darius Cole was not reacting the way they expected, not defensive, not angry, not even embarrassed, just still, controlled, like he had already measured the outcome and found it lacking. Charlotte shifted her weight, her confidence flickering for half a second before snapping back into place as she raised her chin slightly, doubling down. "Well," she said, her tone sharper now, demanding movement, demanding removal, demanding that the room confirm her authority. One of the guards cleared his throat, stepping forward. "Sir, we are going to need to see your invitation," his voice professional but edged with assumption, as if the answer had already been decided. Darius turned his head just enough to meet the guard's eyes, not confrontational, just present, and for a brief second the guard hesitated. Something in that look did not match the script. Across the room, Ethan Brooks finally took a step forward, his fingers tightening around his tablet as he scrolled quickly, eyes scanning the digital guest list. Something about the name, the posture, the calm. It was familiar, too familiar to ignore. But before he could speak, Charlotte let out a soft laugh, light and dismissive. "You are wasting time," she said, glancing around at the growing circle of onlookers. "People like him always try this. They count on hesitation." Her words landed like cues, and a few guests nodded, others whispered, the narrative building itself without evidence. Darius exhaled slowly, almost imperceptibly, his hand lifting just enough to adjust his sleeve again. A small, deliberate motion that felt out of place in the tension, like someone setting a clock before it rang. "My invitation is not the issue," he said finally, his voice low, even, carrying farther than It should have in a room that quiet. The guard frowned slightly, unsure how to respond, because that was not a denial, not an explanation, just a statement that shifted the ground beneath the conversation. Charlotte narrowed her eyes, irritation now breaking through her polished composure. Then what is the issue? She asked, her tone pressing, demanding a mistake. Darius looked past her again, scanning the room, the donors, the coordinators, the silent witnesses holding glasses they had forgotten to drink from. And then his gaze settled briefly on Ethan, who froze, caught in that moment of recognition he could not yet explain. The issue, Darius said calmly, is how quickly a room decides who matters. The words did not rise, they did not accuse, but they landed, heavy, forcing a few guests to look away. The guard shifted his stance, now caught between instruction and instinct. Sir, if you cannot verify your access, we will have to escort you out, he said, but the certainty was gone, replaced by something closer to caution. Charlotte stepped closer, just enough to reclaim control of the space. You heard him, she said, her voice firm again. This is not your place. But this time, it did not echo the same way, because something had already changed, something subtle but irreversible. And as Darius reached toward his wrist, fingers brushing the face of his watch with quiet precision, no one realized that the moment they thought they were controlling had already slipped beyond them, and the next move would not belong to the room at all. The second his finger touched the edge of his watch, nothing visible happened, no sound, no light, no signal that the room could recognize. And yet within 3 seconds the coordinator desk across the ballroom flickered, a tablet screen dimming before refreshing. Ethan Brooks blinked, looking down as the guest registry he had been scrolling suddenly reloaded itself, rows shifting, names reordering, entire sections locking behind a gray overlay that had not been there moments ago. That is strange, he whispered under his breath, tapping again. But the system did not respond the same way. Behind him another staff member frowned. Are you seeing this? She asked, her voice low but tense. Ethan nodded slowly, eyes narrowing as he tried to regain access. But the permissions had changed, not crashed, not broken, changed. Back near the center of the room, Charlotte let out a small, impatient sigh, unaware of the shift already unfolding. This is getting ridiculous, she said, glancing at the security guard as if to push him forward again, remove him. But the guard did not move immediately this time, his attention pulled briefly toward the coordinator desk where subtle confusion was beginning to ripple. Darius remained still, his posture unchanged, his gaze calm, as if he were watching a process complete rather than waiting for a reaction. Across the room a sponsor liaison checked her phone, her expression tightening as a notification appeared. Then another, her smile fading into something uncertain. Hold on, she murmured to the guest beside her, stepping slightly away as she read. A donor near the bar tapped his glass against the counter, trying to get the bartender's attention. But the bartender was no longer looking at him, instead staring at the screen beneath the bar where the event dashboard mirrored the same locked interface. What is going on with the system? Someone whispered. And just like that the room began to shift, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough to break the illusion that everything was under control. Charlotte noticed it then, the distraction, the attention slipping away from her, her eyes flicking toward the staff, irritation sharpening into something closer to unease. Focus, she snapped, turning back to the guard. Do your job. But the guard hesitated. Again, his certainty now fractured by the subtle unraveling around him. Ma'am, there might be a system issue, he said carefully. And that was the moment it changed, because Charlotte did not hear a technical problem. She heard resistance, her expression tightening. There is no issue, she said firmly, as if saying it would make it true. The issue is him, she added, pointing slightly toward Darius. But even as she spoke, another notification buzzed across the room, then another, phones lighting up in pockets and hands. One guest pulled out his device, scanning the message with a confused frown. My donation confirmation just got flagged, he said, not loudly, but loud enough. Another voice followed. Mine too. And suddenly the attention that had been fixed on Darius began to fracture, redirecting toward the systems, the data, the infrastructure that held the event together. Ethan stepped forward now, unable to stay silent, his voice cutting through the tension. Sir, he said, looking directly at Darius. Your name? It is in the system, but it is not just listed. It is, he hesitated, searching for the right word. It is tagged at the top level. The phrase hung in the air, unfamiliar to most, but heavy with implication to anyone who understood access hierarchy. Charlotte turned sharply. What does that even mean? She demanded, her control slipping at the edges. Ethan swallowed, glancing back at his tablet. It means whoever this is has override authority. And for the first time since the moment began, the room did not look at Darius with dismissal. It looked at him with uncertainty. And he had still not moved. The word override did not echo loudly, but it landed with weight, the kind that shifted posture, shifted tone, shifted everything that had been assumed just seconds earlier. Charlotte blinked once, then again, as if her mind needed time to catch up to what her ears had just heard. That is not possible, she said, her voice lower now, less certain, but Ethan did not look at her. He was still staring at the screen, scrolling, tapping, trying to confirm what he was seeing. Top-level access is restricted, he continued, almost to himself. Only primary stakeholders or controlling entities have this tag. And that was when the room began to reevaluate in real time. Guests who had leaned away from Darius now leaned slightly back, not closer, not yet, but enough to signal doubt, enough to create distance from the narrative that had formed so quickly. The security guard shifted his stance, no longer advancing. His attention now divided between protocol and something deeper, something instinctual, because the situation no longer matched. The training. Charlotte stepped forward again, trying to reclaim the center. You are misreading it, she said sharply, her confidence forced now. Systems glitch all the time. But her words did not carry the same authority, not with the growing number of notifications lighting up around the room, not with the staff quietly exchanging looks that said this was not a glitch. This was controlled, deliberate. Across the ballroom, a senior event manager pulled out her phone, dialing quickly, her voice hushed but urgent. We have a system lock at the gala. I need verification on access overrides immediately. She turned slightly away, but her eyes kept drifting back toward Darius, measuring him differently now. Recalibrating, Darius finally moved, not forward, not back, just enough to shift his weight, his gaze steady, his expression unchanged, as if none of this surprised him, as if this was exactly how it was supposed to unfold. Charlotte felt it then, the shift she could not stop, the control slipping not in a dramatic collapse, but in small, undeniable fractures. She turned to the guard again. Why are you standing there? She demanded. But the guard hesitated, just for a moment too long, and in that hesitation her authority weakened further. Ethan took another step forward, his voice more certain now. His profile is not just active, he said, looking up, meeting Charlotte's eyes for the first time. It is above the event host level. A ripple moved through the guests. Subtle but real, because everyone in that room understood hierarchy, understood what it meant to be above the host. Charlotte's lips parted slightly, the first visible crack in her composure. Above the host. She repeated, but the words sounded foreign even as she said them, like something that should not exist in her world. A man near the bar lowered his glass slowly, whispering to the woman beside him. That would mean control over the entire event structure. She nodded faintly, eyes fixed on Darius now, no longer dismissive, no longer certain. The senior event manager ended her call, her face pale but composed as she stepped closer, her voice steady but careful. Sir, she said, addressing Darius directly. We are receiving confirmation that a primary control protocol has been activated from within the system. She paused, choosing her next words with precision. And it is linked to your credentials. The sentence settled into the room like a final piece of a puzzle no one wanted to complete. Charlotte shook her head slightly, as if rejecting it outright. That does not change anything, she said. But even she could hear it now, the difference in her tone, the loss of certainty, the shift from command to defense. Darius looked at her then, fully, for the first time since she had spoken, his expression calm, almost reflective. And when he spoke, his voice did not rise. It did not need to. It changes everything, he said quietly. And in that moment, the room understood that whatever was about to happen next was no longer in Charlotte's control. The words did not echo. They settled, heavy and undeniable. And for a moment no one spoke. because everyone in that room felt the shift, but no one wanted to be the first to acknowledge it. Charlotte's confidence did not collapse all at once. It fractured in small, visible ways. The slight tightening of her jaw, the way her shoulders squared just a little too rigidly, the pause before her next breath. "You are bluffing," she said finally, but the sentence lacked force. It sounded like something she needed to believe more than something she could prove. Darius did not respond immediately. He simply watched her, not with anger, not with triumph, but with a kind of quiet recognition, as if he had seen this exact moment play out before. Different faces, different rooms, same certainty unraveling in the same way across the ballroom. The senior event manager's phone buzzed again. She checked it quickly, her eyes widening just enough to confirm what she had feared. Then she looked up at Darius, no longer cautiously, but with clarity. "The primary funding account has been placed on administrative hold," she announced, her voice steady but carrying across the silence. A ripple moved through the guests, sharper this time, more audible, because funding was not abstract. Funding was power. A donor near the front stepped back instinctively, as if distance could separate him from whatever was happening. Another guest whispered, "That is not a glitch," and no one disagreed. Charlotte turned toward the manager, her voice rising slightly. "You cannot just freeze accounts in the middle of an event." But the manager did not answer her directly. Instead, her gaze remained fixed on Darius, waiting, confirming, deferring in a way that had not existed minutes earlier. Ethan Brooks stepped closer now, his hesitation gone, replaced by urgency. "It is not just the funding," he said, holding up his tablet. "Vendor contracts are being flagged for review. Access permissions are shifting across the board." He swallowed, then added, "Everything ties back to the same authorization." The implication hung in the air, clear enough without being spoken outright. Charlotte shook her head again, but this time it was slower, less certain, her mind racing to find ground that no longer held. "That does not give him the right," she said, but even she could hear it now. The difference, the shift from command to argument, from certainty to defense. Darius finally moved again, a single step forward, measured, controlled, the room adjusting around him without realizing it, creating space not because he demanded it, but because something deeper had already claimed it. His voice came low and even, cutting clean through the noise that had begun to build. "You asked for verification," he said, not looking at the guards, not looking at the staff, but directly at Charlotte. "This is what verification looks like." The sentence did not rise, it did not challenge, it simply existed, undeniable, and that was what made it land. Charlotte's lips parted slightly, her response delayed not by lack of words, but by the realization that none of them would restore what had already shifted. Around them phones were still lighting up, messages still coming through, systems still adjusting in real time. A controlled unraveling that no one in the room could stop, and in the center of it all stood Darius, exactly where he had been from the start, unchanged, unmoved, as if the entire room had finally caught up to a reality he had never left. And for the first time since the moment began, Charlotte did not speak, because somewhere beneath the noise, beneath the pressure, beneath the eyes now watching her instead of him, she understood something she could not undo. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a reckoning she had walked into herself. No one moved to stop it, because there was nothing to stop. The system was not breaking, it was obeying. And that distinction settled over the room like a slow realization that could not be undone. The senior event manager took a step closer, her posture no longer neutral but aligned, as if an invisible chain of command had just restructured itself in real time. "We are receiving confirmation from corporate," she said carefully, her voice steady but carrying across the silence. "All executive protocols have been elevated to priority status." She paused just long enough for the implication to land, then added, "And they are all tied to him." She did not need to say his name. Everyone was already looking at Darius, not with curiosity now, but with recognition forming in pieces. Charlotte felt it more than she saw it. The shift of attention, the quiet repositioning of bodies, the subtle distance forming between her and the people who had stood with her only moments ago. "This is absurd," she said, but her voice no longer commanded the room. It reached for it, searching for agreement that did not come. Ethan Brooks stepped fully into the open space now. "No," longer the uncertain observer, but the witness who had crossed the line into clarity. His credentials are not just overriding the event, he said, holding his tablet at chest level as if it were evidence. They are connected to the foundation itself, the endowment, the venue contract, everything. A low murmur spread through the guests, sharper now, because this was no longer abstract authority. This was structural control. Charlotte's breath caught for just a second before she forced it steady again. You are telling me he controls all of this, she said, but the question sounded like disbelief rather than challenge. The senior manager met her eyes, not with defiance, but with something colder, something factual. We are telling you that every system in this room is responding to his authorization, she replied, and that was the moment the illusion broke completely, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a quiet finality that no one could ignore. Darius stepped forward again, one measured step that seemed to redraw the center of the room around him. His presence no longer questioned, no longer interpreted, simply acknowledged. His voice came low and controlled, each word placed with precision. You built your certainty on appearances, he said, looking directly at Charlotte now, on assumptions that required no verification. The words did not accuse, they revealed, and that made them heavier. Charlotte opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out immediately, because for the first time she was not speaking from a position of control, she was reacting from a position she did not understand. Darius continued, his tone unchanged. I did not correct you, he said, because I needed to see how far it would go. A subtle shift moved through the crowd, not discomfort now, but realization, because everyone in that room had played a part in letting it go that far. The security guard who had stepped forward earlier now stepped back, not out of fear, but out of recognition, recalibrating his role in a situation that had outgrown him. Phones were no longer buzzing with confusion, but with confirmation, names, titles, affiliations appearing in quiet messages that spread faster than any announcement. One guest near the bar whispered, Darius Cole, and another responded, that is him. The name moved through the room in fragments, connecting to reputations, to headlines, to things people suddenly remembered but had not seen in front of them until now. Charlotte heard it too, and for a brief moment her composure wavered completely, not in panic, but in the realization that the ground she had stood on so confidently had never been stable. Darius stopped a few feet in front of her, close enough that the distance between them felt intentional, defined, his gaze steady, his voice quiet enough that the room had to lean into it. You did not misidentify me, he said. You revealed yourself. And in that moment there was nothing left to argue, because the truth did not need to be proven anymore. It had already unfolded in front of everyone. The name did not explode through the room. It spread, quiet and undeniable, moving from one whispered confirmation to the next until it no longer needed to be said out loud, because everyone understood it at the same time. Darius Cole was not a guest, not a mistake, not an interruption. He was the axis the entire event had been built around, and Charlotte Whitmore felt it fully now, not as a theory, not as a rumor, but as a shift in gravity she could not escape. Her shoulders lowered slightly, not in surrender, but in recalibration, searching for footing that no longer existed. If that is true, she said, her voice controlled but thinner now, then why stand here and let this happen? The question was not defiant, it was searching, reaching for logic that could restore balance. Darius held her gaze without hesitation, his expression steady, almost reflective, because access reveals behavior. He replied, each word placed with precision, and behavior reveals truth. The sentence did not accuse, it defined, and that made it final. The senior event manager stepped forward again, her tone now formal, aligned. We have received direct instruction to suspend all external authority claims and reassign operational control, she said, not looking at Charlotte, but addressing the room as a whole, as if resetting the hierarchy in real time. A few guests shifted uncomfortably, some stepping back entirely, distancing themselves from what had just unfolded. Others remained still, watching, processing, understanding that they had witnessed something far beyond a social misstep. Ethan Brooks lowered his tablet slightly, his voice quieter now, but steady. All systems are now recognizing him as primary, he said, And that word settled deeper than any announcement could have. Primary. Not participant. Not sponsor. But origin. Charlotte's breath slowed, her mind catching up to a reality she had rejected only moments earlier. You could have stopped it, she said, not as an accusation, but as a realization forming. Too late. Darius nodded once. Not in agreement, but in acknowledgement of the statement itself. I could have, he said, his voice calm. But then none of this would be visible. He gestured slightly, not toward her, not toward the staff, but toward the room, the witnesses, the silent participants who had allowed assumption to guide action. And what is invisible never changes. The words did not rise, they settled, forcing the room to confront not just what had happened, but how easily it had happened. The security guard who had first stepped forward now straightened, his posture shifting from enforcement to respect, stepping back fully to create space rather than close it. A donor near the bar quietly set his glass down, no longer interested in the event, only in the outcome. Charlotte stood still, her composure not shattered, but redefined, stripped of certainty, replaced by something more honest, more exposed. So this was a test, she said, her voice almost steady again, but quieter, less certain. Darius met her eyes, his tone unchanged. No, he said. This was a mirror. And that was the moment the room understood completely. Not just who he was, but what he represented in that space. Not authority imposed, but truth revealed. And for the first time since the night began, no one moved to interrupt. No one spoke to redirect, because the outcome was no longer unfolding. It had already arrived. The room did not erupt. It settled into something heavier, something final, like a verdict that had already been delivered without a single raised voice. The senior event manager took a breath and stepped forward with full clarity now. No hesitation left in her posture. Effective. Immediately, all operational authority is being reassigned under primary control, she announced, her tone formal, controlled, leaving no space for interpretation. And with that, the invisible structure of the night shifted completely. Staff members who had once taken cues from Charlotte now redirected their attention elsewhere, not dramatically, not disrespectfully, but decisively. As if a switch had been flipped that could not be turned back, Ethan Brooks lowered his tablet and stepped aside, no longer observing but yielding space. Recognizing that the center of the room had been redefined, a quiet movement began among the guests, not chaotic, but intentional, some stepping back, others repositioning, the social gravity recalibrating in real time. Charlotte stood in the middle of it all, not removed, not escorted, but no longer in control. And that distinction was sharper than any public dismissal could have been. Her voice came after a pause, steady but quieter. You are restructuring everything over one moment, she said. But even as the words left her mouth, she seemed to understand how small they sounded against what had already unfolded. Darius did not respond immediately. He let the silence hold, let the room absorb the weight of its own actions, before speaking. Not one moment, he said calmly. A pattern. The words settled deeper, because it expanded the scope beyond the room, beyond the night, into something larger, something that could not be dismissed as isolated. The senior manager nodded once, confirming without needing to elaborate. Multiple prior complaints are now being reopened under review, she added, her voice carrying just enough for those closest to hear. A few guests exchanged glances, the implication clear. This was not a single incident being corrected. It was a system being examined. Charlotte's posture shifted again, not defensive, not aggressive, but reflective in a way that had not existed before. Her gaze dropped for a fraction of a second before returning to Darius. And what happens now? She asked, the question no longer challenging, but searching for ground in a situation she no longer controlled. Darius met her eyes with the same calm he had held from the beginning, unchanged by the shift around him. Now, he said evenly, the room decides what it stands for. He did not raise his voice. He did not issue commands. He simply placed the responsibility back where it had always been, on the people, on the witnesses, on those who had chosen silence when it mattered. And in that moment, the final shift occurred, not in systems, not in authority, but in awareness, because the room understood that what had just happened was not just a reversal of power. It was a reflection of it, And as staff moved with new clarity and guests adjusted to a reality they could not ignore, Charlotte remained still, not removed, not humiliated, but changed in a way that no public consequence could match, because the silence around her was no longer support. It was recognition, and the night, once defined by spectacle, had been rewritten into something far more permanent. The music never fully returned. It lingered at the edges of the room like something unsure of its place, just like the people standing beneath the chandeliers who now found themselves rethinking everything they had just witnessed. The air felt different, not tense, not chaotic, but clarified, as if something invisible had been pulled into the light and could no longer be ignored. Darius Cole stood exactly where he had been from the beginning, unchanged by the shift around him, while the room slowly adjusted to him, not the other way around. The senior event manager moved with quiet precision, speaking to staff, redirecting flow, restoring order under a new understanding of authority, but none of it felt like control being taken. It felt like control being recognized. Charlotte Whitmore remained still for a moment longer, her posture no longer rigid, no longer defensive, but thoughtful in a way that had not existed when the night began. She looked around, not at Darius first, but at the room, at the people who had stood beside her, the ones who had said nothing, the ones who had watched, the ones who had agreed without speaking. And for the first time she saw it from the outside, the pattern, not just in her, but in the system that it shaped. Her certainty, her voice came quieter now, not for the room, but for him. "I thought I understood how this worked," she said, and there was no arrogance left in it. Only realization. Darius met her gaze, calm as ever, his presence steady, grounded. "You understood how it looked," he replied, his voice even, "not how it functioned." The distinction settled deeper than anything else that had been said that night, because it reframed everything. Charlotte nodded slightly, not in agreement, but in acceptance of something she could no longer deny. Around them the guests had stopped whispering, stopped reacting. They were simply watching, absorbing, because the moment no longer belonged to spectacle, it belonged to meaning. A donor near the back straightened his jacket, his expression thoughtful. Another guest lowered her phone, no longer interested in recording, only in remembering. Ethan Brooks stood off to the side, his tablet now still, his role complete, but his understanding changed. He had seen the system from the inside and the outside in the same moment, and that stayed with him. Darius took a final step back, not retreating, but releasing the center of the room, as if the point had already been made and did not need to be repeated. His voice came one last time, not louder, not sharper, but clearer than anything else that had been said. "Respect is not proven by power," he said, letting the words settle before finishing. "It is revealed by how you treat people before you. Know who they are." The sentence did not echo, it anchored, and in that moment the entire room felt it, not as a lesson imposed, but as a truth uncovered. Charlotte did not respond, because there was nothing left to defend, only something to carry forward. And as the night slowly resumed around them, with quieter conversations and more careful glances, one thing remained unchanged: the understanding that what had happened in that room would not be forgotten, not because of who held the power, but because of how clearly it had been revealed without a single raised voice.